My ex-husband's mother stood up in court and called me mentally unstable. His girlfriend nodded as if she'd witnessed it with her own eyes. But that wasn't the part that broke me. It was what my 8-year-old son said next that cracked the whole lie open. That's how I would have started if I were telling this just to shock you, but this story isn't just about shock. It's about betrayal, deep, bruising betrayal, from people you thought were your family. It's about losing everything you thought was real, only to find strength you never knew you had in the last place you expected. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and I never imagined I'd be in a courtroom, accused of being an unfit mother by the very people who once hugged me at Christmas dinner. I used to think the worst kind of pain was heartbreak, the breakup of my marriage to Jason Carter, the man I loved for 11 years. Turns out that was only the beginning. Jason was my first love. He was charming and confident, the kind of man who made you feel like the center of the universe, until he didn't. When we first met, he had this way of making me feel safe, like he could solve any problem. But after a few years, I realized I had become the problem. He started pointing out my overreactions, saying I was too emotional, too sensitive, too dramatic, that maybe I needed help. I brushed it off at first. After all, every marriage has problems, right? I never saw the gaslighting for what it was until I was too worn down to fight. We had a son, Ethan. From the moment he was born, I knew he was my purpose. His laugh could undo the darkest day. He was so gentle, so curious, always asking questions that made me stop and really look at the world. But even that joy couldn't fix what was breaking between Jason and me. I tried to hold on for Ethan's sake. I stayed longer than I should have, until the night Jason told me I was poisoning our son's mind by crying in front of him. That was it. I packed my bags and left with Ethan, thinking finally I'd get to rebuild my life. I saw a therapist. I got a job as a teacher's aide. I pulled together enough money for a small duplex with a patch of yard for Ethan's soccer ball. I thought the worst was behind us. I couldn't have been more wrong. Jason didn't just want to move on. He wanted control. And when he realized he couldn't control me anymore, he went for the only thing that still meant everything: Ethan. He filed for full custody, claiming I was emotionally unstable. That's when I realized this wasn't a divorce anymore. This was war, and he wasn't fighting alone. Enter Margaret Carter, my ex-mother-in-law. Picture a woman who never once raised her voice, but could cut you down with a single comment about your choices. She always thought I wasn't good enough for her son, but she kept it subtle until the trial. When she walked into the courtroom that day, she was dressed like she was going to a church banquet. Pearl earrings, stiff blazer, hair perfectly set. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, and in that moment I realized I was. Beside her sat Brittany Hale, Jason's new girlfriend, 29, bright blue eyes, long blonde hair, and a personality as sweet as a spoiled peach. She gave me a polite smile, the kind that says, "Sorry, but I'm already winning." It was her nod that sealed the knife Margaret twisted. "I've witnessed her instability," she said when the judge asked if she agreed. The words felt like being shoved underwater. I couldn't breathe. I looked at Ethan across the room, my baby boy in a little navy suit, legs too short for the chair. He looked back at me with eyes full of worry, not confusion. He knew what was happening. In that moment, time slowed. I wasn't just a mom being lied about. I was a mom being judged. And I felt the weight of every mistake, every tear, every bad day they were using against me. That's when Ethan did the unthinkable. He raised his hand. "Your Honor," he said, voice trembling but clear. "Can I ask Grandma a question?" The judge blinked, then nodded slowly. What Ethan asked next didn't just tear down their lies. It exposed the truth in a way no lawyer ever could. That's when I knew. The most powerful voice in the room wasn't mine. It was Ethan's. People talk a lot about starting over, but nobody really tells you how heavy it feels. It isn't the boxes you move or the apartment you clean on your own, or even the paperwork you fill out to change your name back. It's the silence. The sudden quiet after years of walking on eggshells. That's what I remember most from the first night Ethan and I spent in our new place. How the silence echoed. I'm Emily Carter, 34 years old, recently divorced, trying to find myself again after years of being told who I was. I rent half a duplex on Meadowview Lane. It's nothing special. The walls are thin, and the heater clanks in the winter, but there's a patch of grass out back. Ethan likes to kick his soccer ball there until dark. Every time he does, I watch from the kitchen window, making sure nothing interrupts that moment of peace. Before the divorce, I didn't even recognize how deep I'd buried myself. Jason was the kind of man everyone else adored. Charming, attentive. The kind of guy who'd help a stranger push their stalled car but criticize me for burning toast. People love a hero. They don't notice when his cape turns into a rope you can't untangle yourself from. I used to be a preschool teacher before Ethan was born. I loved it. The laughter, the tiny shoes lined up by the door, the art projects that made no sense but meant the world to those kids. But Jason told me it wasn't real work. He wanted me home, wanted control. So I quit. Somewhere in those years, I started losing color. Panic attacks slipped in like uninvited guests. I thought something was wrong with me. Jason told me I was dramatic, unstable, upsetting our home. He made me feel like my own brain was the enemy. Therapy brought me back to myself piece by piece. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. But at least now, I know what was happening to me. I know what gaslighting is. I know I wasn't crazy. And most importantly, I know that Ethan deserves a mom who can breathe without asking permission. That's why I took the teacher's aide job at the elementary school 2 towns over. It didn't pay much, but it was mine. I woke up every morning with a purpose. Packed Ethan's lunch, tied his shoes. We'd walk together until our paths split, his to Mrs. Callahan's 3rd grade class, mine to a room full of kindergartners who thought glitter glue was a basic need. But even with the healing, the schedule, the love between me and Ethan, there was always a shadow. Jason. We had shared custody at first, every other weekend, but it didn't feel shared. It felt like surveillance. Like Jason was waiting for me to do something, anything, he could twist into a reason to pull Ethan away. And he tried. Once he picked up Ethan early from school without telling me. Another time he told the school nurse I might be unfit. I could see the confusion in her eyes when she called me to verify. The breaking point came when Ethan started having nightmares. He'd wake up crying, saying, "Daddy says you're sick, but you're not sick, right, Mommy?" That was when I knew what I was truly fighting for. It wasn't just custody. It was my son's sense of safety, his right to grow up without worrying about which parent to believe. My parents, Diana and Greg, were supportive, but from afar. They lived in North Carolina, retired, blissfully unaware of how bad things had gotten. I had tried to tell them, but after years of downplaying it, after years of Jason polishing his image in front of them, they couldn't fully grasp it. "Just focus on getting better, sweetie," my mom would say. She meant well. But what she didn't understand was this. I was getting better. I just needed other people to stop breaking me. The first hearing notice came in a manila envelope delivered on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember the way Ethan's backpack thudded onto the floor as he ran inside. I set the envelope on the counter and just stared at it. My hands trembled, not because I was afraid of court, but because I knew what Jason was capable of. I knew I was walking back into the same hell I had escaped from. And this time, it wasn't just about me. It was about Ethan. Everything was about Ethan. I made a promise that night, standing in our tiny kitchen, watching him draw superheroes on the back of a grocery list, that I would never let anyone take him away. I didn't know how I would fight a man who had the money, the influence, and the loyalty of people who hated me. But I knew I had to try. I owed that to the boy who looked at me like I was the safest place in the world. I wasn't ready. I wasn't confident, but I was determined. And sometimes that's enough to start a war. The thing about a courtroom is, it doesn't care how deeply you've been hurt. It doesn't care how many nights you've stayed up fighting your own thoughts. What matters in that room is who speaks louder, who holds the thicker file, and who's better at hiding their lies behind a polished smile. I learned that the moment I stepped into the courthouse for the custody hearing. The first time I saw Jason in that environment, he was everything he knew the court wanted to see. Clean-shaven, confident, eyes full of false concern. He wore a gray suit, the same color he chose when he wanted to look serious, but not cold. I knew that suit. I'd ironed it enough times. I recognized the watch he was wearing, a gift from his mother that he only wore when he wanted admiration. He didn't look at me as I sat down. He didn't wave to Ethan. He just sat there, legs crossed, whispering to his attorney like this was a business meeting. No remorse, no hesitation, just cold, calculated distance. Behind him sat Margaret, my ex-mother-in-law. She had the air of someone attending a graduation, back straight, pearl earrings catching the light, the faint smell of her floral perfume lingering around her like a mask. She didn't look at me either, but I could feel her judgment like a knife. Next to her was Brittany Hale, Jason's new girlfriend, younger than me by 5 years, with a perfectly curled strand of hair resting on her shoulder. She looked at me, just one, small glance, and smiled sympathetically as if to say she was above all this discomfort. Meanwhile, I sat on the other side of the courtroom with Ethan and my lawyer, Sarah Fields. Sarah was small in stature, but sharp as a blade. She was known for taking on cases other lawyers didn't dare touch. She squeezed my hand before we stood. "Let them talk," she whispered. "We've got truth. They've got gossip." Still, truth didn't feel like much armor against what Jason and Margaret had planned, because the conflict wasn't really about whether I was a good mother. It was about how convincingly they could make people believe I wasn't. The first blow came from Jason himself. He stood tall and spoke softly, but every word was an arrow. "I just want what's best for Ethan," he said. "My concern isn't with Emily's past or her choices. It's about Ethan's safety and well-being. I've watched her struggle emotionally for years. I'm worried she isn't stable enough to provide the kind of environment he deserves." I felt my chest constrict. He was doing what he always did, making himself the hero and me the broken one. Then came Margaret's testimony. The judge asked her to stand. She took her time, smoothing her skirt, pressing her lips together in a silent show of concern. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. "Your Honor, I've known Emily for over a decade. I've watched her throughout her marriage to my son. I've seen her cycles." She paused for effect. "She has a difficult time controlling her emotions. She's impulsive. There was a time she screamed at Jason in front of Ethan over a simple misunderstanding about dinner. That was the first time I worried about her ability to parent. I wanted to shout. That was the night Jason told me I was completely useless because I burned the roast, but I didn't, because I knew it would play into their hands." Margaret wasn't done. "I remember one evening," she said, hand clutching her pearl necklace. "Jason came to my house with Ethan. He said Emily had locked herself in the bedroom after a fight and refused to come out. Ethan was crying, and Jason felt he needed to protect him. That was a lie. I'd taken 5 minutes in the bathroom to breathe after Jason told me I was a curse to the family. But Margaret made it sound like I'd barricaded myself in a tower while my son sobbed on the other side." The judge took notes. No one looked at me. Then it was Brittany's turn. She stood. She nodded shyly to the judge, as if this was all unfortunate. "I haven't known Emily very long," she began, "but I've been around her enough to see her behavior. A few months ago, she yelled at Jason in a public parking lot. She seemed out of control. I was frightened, honestly. She was talking about the time Jason refused to return Ethan after his weekend, and I begged him, in tears, to bring him home. But again, no one cared for context, only delivery. The room was silent except for my heartbeat pounding in my ears. That's when Ethan's hand twitched. His eyes flickered from his grandmother to me. He saw the pain. He saw the lie. And in that moment, I knew something was changing in him, something that made the tension in the room feel like a fuse had just been lit. And neither side knew what was about to explode. If there was one moment I could freeze in time from that courtroom, it wasn't the lies being told about me. It wasn't even the judge writing notes as if my entire life could be summarized in pen scratches. It was the moment I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized he was seeing everything. The lies, the manipulation, the fear, and worse, he was seeing my silence. After Brittany sat down from her testimony, the judge turned to my lawyer. "Ms. Fields, do you have anything more you'd like to present before we move to closing remarks?" Sarah looked at me. Her eyes held a question, not just as my lawyer, but as a human being who saw I was breaking. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like I was drowning inside it. Part of me wanted to stand up, scream the truth, tear down every lie being spoken about me. But another part The part that had been conditioned for years felt frozen. What if they didn't believe me? What if my shaking hands proved their point? I opened my mouth to speak. Nothing came out. Then, from my left, a small hand lifted into the air. It was Ethan. The courtroom rustled, the kind of soft, unsettled shift that happens when something unexpected pierces through the rehearsed. The judge raised her eyebrows and leaned forward slightly. "Yes? Young man, do you have a question?" Ethan's voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. "Your Honor, can I say something? I know I'm not supposed to talk, but I have to. I just want to ask Grandma something." My heart stopped. Time slowed. I wanted to pull him back, protect him from being thrown into this storm. But before I could react, the judge glanced at the attorneys. Jason's lawyer looked startled. Sarah gave a slight nod. The judge's voice softened. "I'll allow it. Go ahead, Ethan." Ethan stood. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Jason. He turned to face Margaret, his grandmother, and the air in the room shifted. "Grandma," he said, "why did you text Dad saying you'd lie for him if he bought you a new car?" The entire courtroom froze. Even the air felt gasped. Margaret's face turned red, then white, then something in between. Jason's lawyer stood up abruptly. "Objection! This is inappropriate." "Sit down," the judge snapped, eyes flashing. "Mrs. Carter, is there such a text?" Margaret's lips trembled. She stammered. "Well, I don't... It's complicated." Ethan didn't wait. He reached into his little navy blazer. "Dad said I didn't need to see it, but I did. It was on his phone. I took a picture." He handed a folded piece of printer paper to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. I gripped the edge of the table. My son had proof I didn't even know existed. Jason's face hardened into something like panic, but still, he tried. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding." The judge raised her voice. "Mr. Carter, be quiet." She unfolded the paper, and there, clear as daylight, was the screenshot, a text from Margaret to Jason. "I'll do it. I'll say what you need in court. I could use help paying for that Camry. You promised." The words were a punch to every lie spoken before. The judge slowly looked up, eyes piercing through Jason first, then Margaret. "Mrs. Carter," she said coldly, "you may step down." Margaret didn't move. She couldn't. Her hand clutched her purse so tight her knuckles whitened. Brittany's mouth hung open, face drained of color. Jason leaned back, the confidence gone, crushed by the truth handed over by his own child. I didn't speak. I couldn't. All I could do was watch as Ethan walked back to his seat beside me. He climbed back into his chair and put his small hand in mine. That simple touch brought tears to my eyes in a way nothing else had. Not the lies, not the court, but that one quiet act of courage. I leaned down and whispered, "You didn't have to do that?" He squeezed my hand. "Yeah, but I wanted to." And that's when I knew, no matter what happened next, something had changed. The power in that room wasn't in Jason's lies or Margaret's fake concern. It was in the truth, raw, unplanned, undeniable truth, from the only person in the room who had nothing to gain. The judge looked at Sarah. "I think I've heard all I need to hear." Her tone was decisive, unshakable. For the first time since I stepped into that courtroom, I believed we might actually win. Not because I finally spoke, but because Ethan did. The rest of the courtroom felt like a movie I wasn't starring in anymore. It was happening around me, words spoken, motions made, objections tossed like confetti, but I was watching it from somewhere else. Somewhere safe. Somewhere new. The truth was out, and it had come from the smallest voice in the room. Once the judge confirmed the validity of Ethan's evidence, she motioned for both attorneys to approach. They spoke in low, clipped tones, Jason's lawyer looking more frantic than composed now. Brittany stood frozen in her seat, her glossy hair hanging in perfect curls over her shoulders, like she'd walked into the wrong story. And Margaret, she looked like the ground had opened up beneath her and she was still falling. The judge turned her attention back to us. She cleared her throat, shoulders squared with authority, and everything got quiet again. "I've presided over a fair number of custody disputes," she began, voice steady and deliberate. "What I've heard today is more than concerning." She paused, eyes moving between Jason and Margaret, her stare sharpening. It appears not only that there has been a manipulation attempt of this court, but that a child is being used as a pawn in a very dangerous game of power. Jason tried to speak. Sarah cut him off before he got a full word out. Your Honor, I think it's clear that my client deserves full custody, given the emotional abuse and deceit surrounding... The judge lifted a hand. Miss Fields, no need to argue further. Then she turned fully toward me. Mrs. Carter, Emily, I want to acknowledge the strength it takes to face this, and the strength your son has just shown. Not every parent deserves such loyalty from their child. I didn't respond. Couldn't. My throat was too tight. Jason's lawyer finally managed to speak. Your Honor, if I may, my client would like to clarify... Clarify? The judge's voice cracked like a whip. Clarify what? That he was willing to fabricate emotional instability to remove a mother from her son's life? That his own mother would lie under oath? That he involved his child in a cover-up he couldn't even hide from him? She leaned forward, brows drawn down. This is not a man who should be responsible for any unsupervised time with a child. She picked up her pen, made one final note, then dug into the papers before her. Effective immediately. Custody of Ethan Carter is awarded solely to his mother, Emily Carter. Full physical and legal custody. Every syllable sounded like a gavel drop. Mr. Carter's visitation will be limited to supervised visitation only until he completes a court-appointed psychological evaluation and parenting course. Depending on the outcome, he may reapply in the future. Jason's face drained of its fake composure. His mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. Reality had finally caught up to him. His entire facade, years in the making, had shattered under the truth of a single text message and the bravery of a child who refused to stay quiet. Margaret lowered her head. The pearls she wore suddenly looked cheap. Brittany sat rigid, eyes glassy, as if she finally realized that proximity to power doesn't always protect you from the consequences of moral failure. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe for a moment. I just looked at Ethan, and he looked back at me, his little shoulders relaxing, the worry in his eyes disappearing like mist in sunlight. He'd been holding in more truth than any child should have to, and in the moment it mattered most, he let it out. As we walked out of the courtroom, reporters and strangers whispered among themselves. Frozen gazes followed us like they were watching the ending of a movie they didn't expect. But for us, this wasn't a movie. It was our life. And it wasn't over. It was just finally ours again. In the courthouse lobby, I knelt beside Ethan and put both hands on his cheeks. You were so brave today, I said, voice breaking. I'm sorry you had to be. He shrugged in that earnest way only an 8-year-old can. I didn't want you to lose me, and I didn't want Dad to keep lying. He paused. Lies don't feel good, Mom. I pulled him in and held him close, breathing him in, his hair smelling like crayons and laundry soap and hope. You saved me, I whispered. He shook his head. We saved each other. And for the first time in years, I believed it. When we left the courthouse that day, the sunlight felt different. It wasn't brighter, not exactly. More like it wasn't slicing through me anymore. It was a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time, a warmth I didn't know I still deserved. The case was closed. The lies were exposed. Custody was secured. But walking out those glass doors wasn't like walking into a happily ever after. It was more like walking into a life I didn't quite recognize, but one I finally had the freedom to shape. Ethan and I didn't celebrate with a big dinner or balloons or a social media post. We went home, to our modest duplex with its thin walls and overly chatty heater. We ordered pizza, and I let him win at Monopoly. He went to bed smiling, but I could still see the exhaustion underneath. He was 8 years old, but somehow wiser than many adults in that courtroom. The next morning, I woke up early. I sat on the porch with my coffee, wrapped in one of my late grandmother's quilts. I watched the world wake up around me, cars pulling out of driveways, kids heading to school, dogs wrestling with invisible enemies in their yards. Life was back to normal for everyone else. For me, it was the beginning of healing. Losing a marriage is one thing. Losing your sense of self in the process is something entirely different. I had spent so long being told who I was, unstable, dramatic, unfit, that it was hard to remember who I had been before all that noise. The court had ruled in my favor, but no judge can hand you back your identity. That part is work you do alone. I went back to therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to stay unbroken. I didn't want the voice of doubt, Jason's voice, Margaret's voice, to ever again drown out my own. I also enrolled Ethan in art therapy. I wanted to make sure he had a way to talk about things when words were too small. The first time he painted a picture of us under a blue sky, holding hands, not a dark cloud in sight. I hung it on the fridge like it was a $10,000 canvas. My parents flew in 2 weeks later. They hugged me tighter than they ever had before. They finally understood. Not because I'd explained it again, but because the court had confirmed what words alone had failed to prove for years. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," my mom said as she helped me fold laundry one night, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Jason, meanwhile, disappeared into silence for a while. Supervised visitation was awkward. It wasn't angry, just empty. He brought coloring books and sometimes tried to make conversation about school, but Ethan was guarded. He was polite, but the spark was gone. It didn't make me happy. It didn't make me vindictive. It just made me sad. Because the truth was, the person Jason was pretending to be didn't even exist anymore, and now he had to meet the person he really was. Brittany left him not long after the hearing. I heard about it through a mutual acquaintance. She didn't leave because she was betrayed. She left because the spotlight of truth had been too bright. Margaret still sent Ethan birthday cards, signed in shaky cursive. Sometimes I let him read them. Sometimes I don't. Life moved slowly at first. No dramatic highs, no crushing lows, just steady. And I learned that steady is beautiful. One day, as Ethan and I walked back from the ice cream shop, he asked me, "Hey, Mom, do you think people who lie ever really get away with it?" I looked at him, trying to decide how to answer in a way a child could carry into adulthood. "No," I said finally. "They might for a little while. They might win something they don't deserve or get other people to believe them. But lies don't grow roots. They can't survive in the long run. Truth always comes back, sometimes when you least expect it." He nodded, as if that answer settled something in him. After dinner that night, he handed me a drawing he'd made at school. It was me, standing on a hill, cape flowing, arms crossed like a warrior. Underneath, in bold red crayon letters, he'd written, "Best Mom, not crazy." I hung it on the fridge next to the first one, and I realized the greatest victory wasn't winning custody. It was reclaiming my story, teaching my son that courage isn't just speaking up, it's speaking truth into a world that tries to silence it. So if you're listening to this, hoping for permission to let go of lies, this is it. If you're fighting to be believed, hold steady. If someone has made you question your worth, come home to yourself again. Sometimes the smallest voices hold the biggest truth. And sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is simply not give up. Before you go, just take one more breath with me. Life doesn't hand us a script. Sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who try to break us. And sometimes the smallest, quietest voice ends up changing everything. If you're going through something right now, if someone is trying to rewrite your truth, I hope this story gave you a little strength to keep going. You are not alone, and your truth matters. If this video spoke to you, even in the smallest way, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that courage can come from anywhere, even from an 8-year-old boy in a courtroom. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had someone try to silence your truth? Or better yet, have you been the one to finally speak up? Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There's so much more to come. More stories, more strength, and more reminders that you matter. Thanks for watching. Stay brave, stay real, and I'll see you in the next one.